Thanks for the organizers and everybody in the audience for interest. It's very nice to talk for clinical audience, as I understood about this science that we have done. I'm a medical doctor from my background, but for the last year my main interest has been in research, but I also weekly practice as a general practitioner and in an emergency room doctor also in Finland. And I'm here talking, sent here by my professor Samuli Ripatti, who's a professor of biometry at University of Helsinki and Finnish Institute of Molecular Medicine. And in our group, we are interested not only in genomics of alcohol-related diseases, but variety of common diseases where we do research not only in discovery, but also building new models for genomic prediction, which means how can we use genetic information of heritable factors to better predict clinical outcomes of common meaningful diseases. And one of these interest areas is alcohol. So, as a background, we know that both globally, but also in Finland and Estonia, alcohol is the drug of abuse that causes most health harms, both morbidity and direct mortality. From twin studies, we know that alcohol-related behavior is strongly affected by heritable factors. The estimates vary, but we can pretty confidently say that up to 50% of the variance in the population is explained by the genetic factors, and the other half in the variance is explained by environmental factors. Of course, I have to state that for those who are not that familiar with genetic studies, the heritability as an index, it just states that half of the variance in population is explained by genetics. It doesn't mean that if half of individuals' behavior is explained by genetic factors. So not to be confused. But from twin studies now, the modern analytical approaches allow us to directly study the genetic samples, and from there we can actually study this genetic component, variant to variant, and also use this information to build new models. Here I just saw as an example that what of these large-scale GWAS is, which means genome-wide association studies, which means that we individually study every genetic variant that we have in a sample, up to 10 million of them, and see how strongly they are associated with the outcome of interest. Alcohol drinking and all the other alcohol-related traits, we have found out that they are extremely polygenic, and even though the heritability of these traits is high, we need extremely large sample sizes to get any information out of these studies. For example, this study done in the States used a little bit less than 100,000 samples, and we actually see pretty much nothing. And then this next study was done then in the UK Biobank, but there we see that when we start to add the sample size up to 100,000, then the polygenic nature of the alcohol-related behavior starts to reveal itself. What is maybe a little bit surprising, or not how we like to think about it, that even though alcohol drinking is like a behavior trait, what we first start to see from the genome is actually the metabolizing enzymes that are related to alcohol, and not yet anything, for example, dopaminergic or something that actually has a direct pathway that leads into brain function and thus behavior. But just to show that, of course, in genomic studies, we can study at one time just one simple trait, and the studies that I show you was about alcohol consumption. But also, other studies have been conducted. For example, it has been separately studied at what genes are associated with audit score, then what genomic instruments are associated with alcohol dependence, that where the diagnosis has gone a proper psychiatric interview and the pipeline has been very strict. And also these kind of proxy phenotypes where we have summed up the problematic alcohol drinking into one. And just as a summary, I can say that these studies have shown that the alcohol-related traits correlate genetically very strongly, but they are also distinct for themselves. Then the genetic architecture of alcohol dependence, for example, differs from genetic architecture of alcohol consumption. Then, from these foundations, we started our project, where we then, of course, wanted to see if this genetic information can be used in scientific or clinical settings. Basically, we wanted to see if the genetic information that we have gathered from these huge genomic studies translates actually to health outcomes, and can we differentiate population parts of the populations based on the genetic information to see whether we can find individuals who have higher risks to suffer from the harms of alcohol based purely on their genetics that people are born with. And of course, we wanted to also study that does this genetic information have any meaning if we basically know something about the patients. For example, it's very easy to ask how much do you drink and get some sort of a estimate, even though it's unreliable, or what is your education, do you have a work, are you married, etc. So we wanted to also see if this genetic information has any meaning if we include some basic baseline covariates into these models. So basically, this is a very simplified model which explains how which factors translate into the harms of alcohol drinking. So genomics drives alcohol drinking behavior, and alcohol drinking behavior drives the morbidity and mortality. And we wanted to actually simplify this so that what kind of an information is included in the genomics if we don't know, or if we know this component. So how strong does the genomics of the people predict alcohol-related morbidity and mortality? And this, our research is now in the publication process. It can be found from bioRxiv, it's a preprint service. If you want to take a deeper look, you can search it, such, for example, Google my name and bioRxiv. So there you can find it. It's very easy. So first, I want to introduce the study setting in our study. So we use FinnGen study, which has almost 100,000 samples and records the comprehensive health history of all the study samples. Every visit in every hospital, every drug purchase, and data from death registries. What FinnGen lacks is that we have only the information that we can gather from the registries and the genes, but for example, we don't have any questionnaire information in this study. But fortunately, this was backed up by our very large prospective cohorts, FinRisk, Health 2000 and Twin cohort, where we have a little bit over 35,000 subjects, where we have very, very comprehensive interview questionnaire about lifestyle factors, about marital status, about family history, etc. And then we took a summary statistics from the largest existing meta-analysis of alcohol consumption, which already has more than 500,000 study subjects. And from these summary statistics, we built a genome-wide polygenic risk score, which includes over 1 million genetic variants, and weighted it. And for each individual that is in the study, we built an individual polygenic risk score to predict their alcohol drinking. And just a quick look about the structure of the FinGen study. It's now just started. We are aiming to build a biobank of up to 500,000 Finns, which includes all the national health register data, so all the hospital visits and death registry data, cancer registry, everything. Then we took blood sample and build so that we can track their whole genome. And then we can do association analysis and get very, very comprehensive, detailed information, starting from their birth and until they die. So this is just a study that is the largest has been done by the GScan consortium. It covers over 1 million people, maybe just to show that actually the genetic studies in global genetic studies are becoming very huge, and they are also needed for these extremely complex study settings. So this is pretty technical, but I also just wanted to show that if you remember the genome-wide association studies that I showed in the first page, where there was basically nothing, now that we have over 500,000 cases, then the polygenic structure of the trait becomes even more like apparent. Everything that goes above the red line that is here is statistically significant. And how to build a polygenic risk score. We use the summary level GWAS statistics from the meta-analysis. Then we have the reference panel that tells something about the how the Finnish genomes are arranged. Then we arrange this information together, and then we get the polygenic risk scores for every individual. And this is our first result. We divided this polygenic risk score into 10 categories. So into deciles. So these are the first 10% of the population who have the smallest polygenic risk for drinking, and these are the 10 highest percent. And we see separately for both men and women that this polygenic risk score actually is very strongly associated with their alcohol drinking. The people in the highest decile drink up to 1.5 times more than those who are in the lowest decile. And the association was the same both with men and women. And also what is interesting, it doesn't have that much to do with genomics. That what we also see, of course, here is that there's a huge gap between men and women. I believe this is the case also in Estonia. And also another result that we got from here is that actually the polygenic risk score is also associated with being a non-drinker. So every SD that you go up in the polygenic risk score reduces your likelihood for being a non-drinker by 13%. And the next step for our analysis was then to see that does then this polygenic risk translate to real health outcomes. Is it just drinking, or do these people also who have the higher risk for drinking, do they suffer more strongly of the alcohol-related morbidities? And how to study this? We built a combined endpoint when we gather all the alcohol-related morbidities and mined all the events from the Finnish health registries, and everybody who had suffered of any condition labeled as to be alcohol-related was assigned to this endpoint. Then we did a survival analysis, and indeed we saw that between the highest 20% and the middle 60% and lowest 20%, there is a significant risk to suffer from alcohol-related morbidities that starts to differentiate early in life and gets even wider when the patients get older. And this risk estimate between the highest and lowest risk quintiles was 1.83. And we wanted to answer this question in the prospective cohorts, is that what then happens if we start to add the baseline information into these models? So this data shows what is the hazard ratio, the risk estimate between like when the risk grows one standard deviation, how much does the risk then grow? And we see that when we don't include any baseline data, the risk estimate per 1 SD is 1.26, and when we then add alcohol consumption, it's still statistically significant. It's the hazard ratio is 1.15 per SD. And when we also include other covariates, marital status, education, GGT, gamma-glutamyl transferase, the risk estimate still stays statistically significant. We also saw that actually the polygenic risk scores also associates with alcohol-related mortality alone, and the risk estimate is about the same. And also, when all the covariates are included, is then the association is still there. We also wanted to study, what about other deaths? Because we know that not all mortality caused by alcohol is recorded in registries as to be caused by alcohol. So we tested all-cause mortality, and which is also a very used outcome when we just do epidemiological studies and study at what are the risk estimates for alcohol drinking, how much does it associate with all-cause mortality. And here we see that, the association is not that strong, but still the polygenic risk score of just alcohol drinking also it's associated with a higher risk for mortality of any cause, and these associations still stay significant when all the baseline covariate information is added to the model. This just then we also built this very simple machine learning algorithm where we build this survival analysis model in one of our prospective cohorts, FinRisk, and then tried to predict the alcohol-related outcomes in another cohort, which is Health 2000. And we saw that our model performed quite well when there was no covariate information included in the model. But then when we added the polygenic risk score, we needed these more sensitive instruments to see that, the predictive model still performs quite well. But it has to be also stated that we found out that our models, when we just include these basic baseline information, non-genetic basic baseline information, we see that this is surprisingly good. Up to 85% of the mortality is predicted in this model by all these like non-genetic environmental components. So there is not much yet to be discovered by genetics if we know the very comprehensive data from the baseline information. So only 15% from these models is missing, and 85% is very high. And also this was also just an interesting, we also tested the association between the polygenic risk score and then the alcohol dependence or alcohol use disorder, which was diagnosed by proper psychiatric interview pipeline, actually from the it was of the American standards, because this was used in a larger meta-analysis. And we see that, okay, the polygenic risk score is associated with also alcohol use disorder, but also interestingly we see that it's not associated as strongly as the overall mortality. And when we adjust it with all the basic covariate information, almost all of the effect goes out. This maybe reflects the truth that also can be seen from the large genetic studies, is that actually the alcohol consumption and dependence differ genetically from each other. And then there is another question, is that, well, okay, now we have this genetic information, and we just showed that, okay, it predicts alcohol-related morbidity, and maybe we can use it to build like better predictive models, and maybe we can also like find out individuals who have a higher risk to suffer from the causes of alcohol. But we also saw from our study is that, okay, if then we already know like very basic information that can be gathered from, for example, simple clinical settings where we just ask for the reported alcohol drinking, your educational background, your marital status, and your employment status at the moment, then we saw that the predictive value of these models is not that strong. They are the strongest in the cases where we don't know these basic covariate information. For example, it could be maybe used in like childhood or juvenile settings when actually the alcohol consumption has not yet developed to the level where the genetic risk is driving it. But about prediction, then we wanted also as a group, we are also testing the opportunities in genetic information as a motivation for change. And this is an ongoing study that we are doing about cardiovascular disease risk, where we are studying that how strong of a motivator is this genetic information for change. And previous knowledge is that, okay, if we just give people a risk score which has only a few variants and a very weak effects, it doesn't motivate for change. People don't want to change their behavior based on this information. And on the contrary, when we have these like single genes that have very strong effects, for example, with breast cancer, etc., they are motivation for very huge lifestyle changes, even surgeries or complete changes in lifestyle behavior. So we wanted to shoot like in between them and build a very large genome-wide polygenic risk scores, and then give this information back to the patients and see how much does their health behavior change. And in this study we included 7,000 subjects. We took the blood samples in the clinical settings, and then based on this information, the genetic information was given back to the patients, and then they were followed about how well or how strongly do this information motivate to change their lifestyle. And from this is an interesting result is that we find that people actually who got to know that their genetic risk for cardiovascular disease is higher, it was like a motivation for their change to take action on their health behavior. Weight loss was achieved in a statistically significant more proportion in people. More physicians were seen, 20% of the patients seen a physician within a year compared to 8%. What is maybe not that encouraging for our genetic studies is that where we did not see is that there was not significant change in quitting of smoking. Actually, alcohol drinking behavior was not measured in this study setting. And about like overall attitudes towards this genetic information is that people were very positive about it. They found the results useful, easy to understand. About only 20% found them unexpected, 30% found them concerning, and up to 97% of the people saw that actually this genetic information motivates me to take some changes in the lifestyle. And also almost 100% believe that they can affect their disease risk through their own behavior. And also almost 90% also said that, okay, genetic information motivates me to actually make these changes. Where we got the lowest result is that the patient did not yet, I hope yet, 25% of the patients did not believe that doctors know how to interpret and utilize this genome information. And then is the question about where can we take our study next? Well, because of the polygenic nature of the alcohol-related or any other health behavior traits, we actually need even larger sample sizes. Not even hundreds of thousands or hundreds of thousands is enough, but we actually probably need like tens of millions of people that are analyzed, and then we get the weights for each variant and calculate them, and then we get more precise genomic instruments that can be used in these predictive models. But this is something actually not to worry about, because this is like a huge motivation like globally around, and bigger genomic studies are arising. So basically here to get this part of the predictive models and the genomic information better, we actually just have to, as a clinicians, to wait. My own prediction is that these models will be very much better from 10 years to now. We saw the same with the cardiovascular disease and these some other disease, for example cardiovascular diseases. We were in 10 years ago, in 2010, we were able to build a polygenic risk score that contained only like 40 genetic variants, and the risk estimates and associations were on the same level as we now have in the alcohol-related polygenic predictions. Now we are publishing like the next generation papers about these polygenic predictions, where the genetic risk score has grown from 40 instruments to 6 million instruments, and also the risk estimates have skyrocketed. they were about the same 10 years ago. So what we have now, 1.8, I believe the 40 variant risk score 10 years ago was able to create the risk estimate of 1.6, but now the risk estimates is about 5. So when we compare the lowest and highest quintile in cardiovascular disease risk prediction, there is a 5-fold increase in the risk. So these genetic instruments get better as the studies that we use to build these models. So there is nothing to worry about. And also one thing is that also evolving is the algorithms that we use actually to build these polygenic risk scores. And for example, now we in our study only took into account one of these alcohol-related traits, which was alcohol consumption. And we see from genetics and also from epidemiological studies that the traits are correlated, but they are not completely the same. So one of the next steps is that we want to combine all these genetic instruments that are built based on different alcohol-related traits and see whether combining them actually improves these models, because I think it's very predictable that it will happen. When we then get our models to work even better, then we have to start actually this real-life experience where we communicate this genomic information to the patient and then see what happens, because it's not that direct. It has to be studies, because we know, for example, from some other settings that actually when people get to know about their that okay, you have this risk to behave in this way, we don't surely know that is this a motivational for change, or could there also be this is kind of like a stereotype threat sort of a behavior, which is known in social psychology, that actually when people are aware about their negative expectations, they actually start to realize them. So, for example, if people know that because of your background or because of you are pretty bad at school, this doesn't actually motivate to change to become better at school, but they actually start to perform more poorly. So I think that we have to be extremely aware when we are starting to communicate any behavior-related genetic information. Okay, you are very high. You are the very easy example, if we communicate, okay, you have very high genetic risk that you are both a smoker and a drinker, and you will probably die because of it. So if the effect that happens in large-scale populations is that, okay, now I have to smoke and drink because my genes say so, I cannot do anything about it. It has been written in genes, so it has to be studied like very carefully, in my opinion, what really happens in population change for these high-risk individuals when they know. It's the same as we see there's a very, very good like South Park episode, so where Randy gets to know that he's an alcoholic, and then he cannot do anything about it. So will something like happen with the genomic information that is related to behavior? We get very promising results from the cardiovascular disease polygenic risk score, but we have to distinct between them. That okay, we know that your genomic risk to suffer from the outcome is high. It's not that it's different from your genetic risk to behave in a way that makes you suffer from these health outcomes. I personally see a very distinct difference between these two. So, and but for example, I see in these substance abuse related genomic prediction, one of the concepts where I see what is good about this is that the genomic prediction, genetic risk is something that you are born with, and it's also present in when you are 10 or 15 years old. So actually it's present there before you have even started to develop these substance abuse related behavior patterns. And we know from epidemiological studies that prevention of these substance abuse is much more effective than treating the behavior or the substance abuse related psychiatric conditions when they have already emerged. So this is one of the study settings that I see that could be used, and where the genetic information could be an instrument for cost effectiveness and effectiveness. That could there be like a more stronger pressure maybe for prevention for the proportion of population who are in a high genetic risk, and could this kind of a moving maybe the pressure for those who are in the highest risk, maybe based on genomics, could it lead to better outcomes of these individuals? So this is one of the things that I would like to see somewhere happening, maybe in the next 20 years, at least to be studied. Intervention with juvenile teenager population before the substance abuse patterns have already developed. Yes, and as a conclusion, what we can take from our study is, okay, we were able, from pure genetic instruments, we were able to build a polygenic risk score which was associated with both alcohol consumption, and this genetic information translated directly also to the harms of alcohol use. And the polygenic risk score was associated with these alcohol-related outcomes, even when we included all the baseline covariate information that was available into the models. So the association, even though it predicts alcohol consumption, the polygenic risk score associated to health outcomes, even when we know how much does the subject drink at the present moment, or reports to be drinking at the present moment. And our predictive models that we built and tested showed promise that this polygenic risk score could be used to detect part of the population or individuals who are in higher risk to suffer from alcohol-related harms. And the last and one of the most important messages is that the effects of communicating this behavior-related genomic information to the public have to be very, very carefully studied. So, and for the last 5 minutes, we still have time for questions. First, I want to thank you, all the group. Nina Mars is one of the, she does a lot of polygenic risk score studies. She has now built these new risk models for all various, over like dozens of the different health outcomes. They work very well. Teemu did the analysis in the twins. A lot of other folks. Jaakko Caprio is a pioneer in twin studies with alcohol-related and tobacco-related studies, and Veikko Salomaa, Pia Mäkelä from National Institute of Health, and then my group leaders Aki Havulinna and Samu Linna. Also a huge thanks to GScan Consortium, who built this like huge study of up to 1.2 million people. These huge efforts are needed to conduct these studies. And I also want to study all the participants of the FinGen study for their very, very generous contribution to the science. So thank you very much, and if somebody has any questions, be free to ask them.
Kiitos, Tuomo.
Yes.
Ma võin aidata tõlkida, kui keegi ei soovi inglise keeles küsida. But, maybe I have a question.
Yes.
I don't know how easy it is to answer.
Yes.
As a psychiatrist, I think I have been puzzled over the years about the way we cannot agree on the phenotype of alcohol-related disorders.
Yes.
Do you see this as a problem as
Yes.
well? Just to explain, I will say a few words because not everybody is a medical doctor here. Et minu küsimus on rohkem sinna suunatud, et meil on arstidena tihtipeale olnud keeruline diagnostiliselt kirjeldada alkoholi probleeme. See arusaam sellest, mis on sõltuvus, mis on kuritarvitamine, on viinudki sellele, et osa klassifikatsioonid kasutavad sellist laia mõistet nagu alkoholi kasutamise häire, mis ka eestikeelsesse kirjandusse on jõudnud ja tekitanud väga palju segadust, et mis see siis ikkagi on, aga minu küsimus oli see, et milline see kommentaar oleks siis geeniuuringute poole pealt. So, could you comment on behalf of the genetic studies if this phenotypization problem also affects your studies?
It's actually one of the reasons why we also have not yet been able to, like, for example, from the registries to very reliably study, for example, alcohol use disorder, because it has studied in years, and which is the code that we put in the registries, it changes. So we have it's very hard to see who are actually the problem users based on the registries, and also this is good thing and bad thing. Good thing for clinic is that, for example, every year, every time a new DSM version comes around, or the ICD-10 version, the codes change, and also the definitions itself change. Now we are actually now together, like psychiatric genetic consortia. We are now building like a new study where we are trying to get our phenotype more focused on the actually the problematic or alcohol dependence, and not just like, for example, in our like phenotype there were some like outcomes that are not associated that strongly to alcohol dependency, for example, accidental poisoning or such. But the phenotyping is a problem, and we don't know actually yet very strongly that is the differences that we know about the genomic differences that we get from the studies, are they actually like real, or is it just like a phenotyping problem? Because we can also, is it something that is purely related to statistics? Is, for example, if we study like, let's say, BMI as a continuous variable, we get some sort of a genetic architecture. But then if we in a comparison study like a cutoff, just the very high BMV individuals versus the rest, the genetic architecture looks very, very different, even the trait is same. So both in these genomic studies, the best way to phenotype harmful alcohol use is one of the biggest challenges that we have in the field. Thank you.
Thank you for this comment. Veel küsimusi? Jah, näen seal, palun.
Okay, I will ask in English. So, what do you think are these polygenetic risk scores or the algorithm? Will they be universal, or at least universal in Europe, or like can we use these polygenetic risk score algorithms that you are developing in Finland here in Estonia?
Yes, the cool thing about this algorithm is that we got from the cheese, this is also something that is also another hot topic, is that we don't want to overfit these models, so that if we, for example, have a Finnish study sample and then build polygenic risk score based on that, then it will probably work just in Finland, but not anywhere else. But fortunately, for example, our polygenic risk score we got from the Cheese concern or new meta-analysis where we had excluded all the Finnish samples. So in our foundation sample, there were no Finns, and it still worked. But this something that also has to be taken into account is that actually these polygenic risk scores only work now in white Europeans. And because how we have conducted these studies is that we have conducted them in very developed countries based on voluntary participation, and these are all something that are also like associated in modern European societies. They are correlated to ethnicity. So actually the problem is that we cannot now build polygenic risk scores for any other ethnicity because there are not enough samples. But I'm pretty confident that what we do in Finland works pretty well in Estonia too.
Thank you, thank you.
Nii, kas, näen siin veel ühte kättu sinus, doktor Kask. Mikrofon.
Et kliinitsistidena me oleme hästi huvitatud nendest, et kuidas nii-öelda kindel olla, et see, mida patsient meile räägib, on õige ja me vaatame neid nii-öelda alkoholi tarvitamise biomarkereid. Et kas on ka geneetilisi alkoholi tarvitamise biomarkereid, et ma küsin osaliselt, ma vastust tean jah, et tõesti on, et on need epigeneetilised muutused, mis tekivad alkoholi tarvitamise tagajärjel ja aga et kas te ka oma töös vaatasite neid epigeneetilisi muutusi, et alkoholi tarvitamine ise muudab seda nii-öelda genoomi, et DNA on ju nagu raamat, et kui ta on kinni, me ei loe sealt midagi, et seda infot ei kasutata, aga et kui alkoholi tarvitatakse, siis tekib geenide hüpa- või hüpermetüleerimine ja see väga oluliselt nii-öelda mõjutab, mis juhtub.
Do you need that
A quick translation.
Quick translation. I try my best, but Ants will,
Yes.
because it's a bit beyond my expertise. So the question was about the epigenetic biomarkers that can be changed by alcohol consumption. And if there is a correlation now with the genetics in this field that you have recognized, kas ma sain õieti aru su küsimusest?
I have to say that I think with alcohol the epigenetic study is very hard to conduct. There has not been that much of that study. I know that in smoking related traits these kind of epigenetic studies have been conducted, and there we see like that the traits are associated. From what we don't, this is not directly answer to the epigenetic compartment of the question, but this was not done in our study, but in Britain they also studied that when they added a comprehensive history of the parents and relatives alcohol drinking information to these models, the associations of genetic risk were still like there. So, but this doesn't really, because it's also environmental factor. I think that the epigenetics is something that has to be studied, but I think that it will be something that is also extremely difficult to study.
And there was a part of the question that was related to the biomarkers that we use in the diagnostics.
Yeah. Actually, in our we have the gamma GT that we see, and we also like included it in the models. The only information that we could get that when the biomarker was included, the models, it did not change the way the genetic polygenic risk score performed. So I believe that they are part distinct, but the problem there is also that gamma GT or any other biomarker is not very specific and very unreliable.
Specificity and sensitivity are both suboptimal, so
yeah, I think they are distinct to put. The genetic information has something to offer even if we get the best biomarkers. At least this is the state of the art.
So thank you once more. Lõpetame siin küsimustega, sest aeg sunnib takka, et kohvipausi all during the coffee pause you can still be reached.
Actually, I have to go to the airport because I have the next event happening in Sweden.
Sending an email to Tuomo will be the
solution. You can
solution.
send me, it's my name at helsinki.fi. If you have any questions or want to understand if there were some like components, because I'm so deep in this genetic study research, so I don't yet anymore know what is something that other people don't understand, but only me. So if something was hard to understand, please contact me. Thank you again.
Thank you once more.
Thanks.
Yes.